What's up, guys? If you're watching this recording, good on you. Zach and I are chilling. 8 guys or so responded that they'd be joining us, but it's always difficult when they actually come around to showing up on a Zoom on a Thursday night. So this might be a good opportunity for us, Zach, to actually continue what you were just saying before I started recording, in terms of catching up. But go back to what you were just saying, because I think there's a valid point. I wanted to riff off of that, but wanted to record before we got too far into it.
Yeah, I think what I was saying is I'm being mindful because I know I've been working on fear a lot lately as far as mindset goes. And I'm watching around me as there's a lot of uncertainty. And so, whether it's gas prices or the economy or recession or mortgage rates going up, and it's just got a lot of people scared to move and indecisive. And I'm watching it for my business because, what out of the 3 businesses I'm doing, I'm pushing pretty hard. And there's potential for something to go wrong, right? As there always is. So I'm just watching that, and I think it's hard not to fall into that mindset, but I think it's also important to be aware that that's the environment we're in.
Yeah, and for guys that are watching and catching up on, like, what are the 3 businesses that you kind of dabble in? I know the answer to this, but fill the guys in so they get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, so my main business is real estate. I've been doing it for 7 years. It was pretty hard transition going from full-time retail management into my own business. And then just in the last, 5 months, we started an Airbnb, bought an investment property in Tennessee. And
That's
then
awesome.
in November, we started on Turo. And like I mentioned, the Turo thing's expanded pretty rapidly. I have 7 cars right now, and 6 are on Turo. And 3 of those cars are pretty nice cars. They're pretty much dream cars that I never thought I would own. So,
so you get to drive those a little bit, don't you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I obviously there's a nice balance between like picking what I want to drive and making money. So 2 fast cars out this weekend. So I'm like, dang, I don't get to drive a fast car this weekend, but making money is a pretty good alternative for that. So
right. Let's talk about a little bit in terms of what are your thoughts in regards to, I think it's inevitable, right? In terms of the economy and it being cyclical. We've obviously been in a bull market, the longest bull market in history, right? We've been enjoying that for a long time, and now things are starting to really get pretty volatile. How are you going about kind of, mitigating your risk in all 3 businesses, or you can talk about any one of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, the diversity is nice, right? Because if in real estate, it's hard because if I have a bad month in real estate, or a couple slow months in real estate, one really good month basically just catches me up from the slow months. But what I've noticed I've kind of diversified in that, Turo kind of takes care of the car payments. Airbnb kind of takes care of my real estate payments. And then, that leaves it takes the pressure off me real estate wise to perform, but knowing that I do need that money to get ahead. So that helps a lot, the diversification. But the other thing I was thinking about when you were mentioning, kind of the environment we're in is how are we leveraging against what's going to happen? I think everybody's uncertain and scared, and they're not thinking like, how do you leverage against, recession or inflation or, the market changing. And the last thing I was going to share is, I think, and I've seen this in real estate as of recently, everybody kind of listens to what they're being told, but not realizing when people are in fear, there's always opportunity.
Yeah.
Always. And so, you know, and I'm not saying that I don't go back and forth in fear. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, as I'm scanning the horizon for danger, I'm also saying, but is there opportunity in the midst of this danger?
Yep. And I would say too, I mean, I've heard that Warren Buffett say that, like, times of greatest pessimism is actually the times of greatest opportunity, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's good because it is a what do you call it, a reframe of like, oh shit, I feel this sense of like this contraction going on inside me emotionally, and I want to pull back and play safe, and yet that actually is the moment that people who are making a ton of money, you know, are looking for those opportunities, you know. So I think you're right about that, and I think that's a really good point that I want to kind of harp on this whole arena brotherhood, is that when shit starts hitting the fan, that's actually when we need to expand versus contract. So I think that's
well, and I agree, but I also think it's time for us to buckle down, get serious about, you know, I call it my one thing, right? And so like if times get tough, I just need to get better at that. And then other thing that I'm huge on is the fellowship piece, you know, like really getting guys around you and asking other guys, what are you doing? What are you doing that's working? How are you getting through? Is there anything we can support each other on? Because, you know, I think it's really important, and it really tells our character of how we act in the storm, you know. But the great thing is, in any of us that can weather the storm, on the other side of that, you know, the storm clears up. And then if we muscle through the storm, you know, there's could be some really good stuff on the other side.
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to change. I mean, there's more than, you know, obviously just you and I kind of had different things I wanted to go into. This is just you and I kicking it. I say we take this a little bit more like us sitting down for coffee than us like leading a podcast, you know.
Yeah.
We're teaching. So why don't we just shoot the shit like we normally would and talk about anything, whether we talk about Airbnb or I forget where we left things off on our last coffee a couple weeks ago, where I was like, oh, I want to sit down and keep diving into that. Refresh my memory. Do you remember anything that you wanted to get into?
Shoot, I'm drawing a blank too. I know we were talking about Turo a little bit, the Airbnb, and some of the coaching stuff.
Let me ask you this: in terms of the Turo, you got the thing that I am, you know, did a podcast on even yesterday was about just like making sure that you're not over leveraging in just one asset class, you know, not just like having a huge portfolio of Airbnbs or a huge, you have a lot of cars, right? How are you,
I'm extremely leveraged on them. And that's where the fear can kind of sneak in, you know, if I'm not careful.
Right. So what's your exit strategy if shit starts to hit the fan in one way or another? Do you have an exit strategy in terms of like how to liquidate them or how to get out from underneath them? Like, what's your approach on those?
I think, how can I answer that the best way? I have to be careful. I have to be careful with coming up with plan Bs, because my subconscious can easily work me into self-sabotage. So I think what I tell myself, you know, day to day, is, you know, if I need to get out, I can. And the best way to answer your question is, what I've done is, because my anxiety around fear and around finances is extremely high. And so I've built a buffer into my business account to where if I have an emergency come up, I can just act and move on. And then that can be for the Airbnb, that can be for Turo, that could be for real estate. But then my other big strategy is I have and this may be oversharing, but I don't mind sharing. I have a HELOC on my house, and I use that to buy my Airbnb.
Yeah.
And so, and I've purposely kept them separate. So I don't use real estate money for cars because I want to keep them separate. But my goal is to have that buffer in my account and then to pay that HELOC off as fast as I can. Because really with those two things, if I do need to exit, you know, and I don't want to use real estate equity to exit out of Turo. But I think it's important to have a backup plan if the market does shift on us or something out of my control comes up. Does that answer your
Questions
question?
I have. Yeah, it totally does. But a couple of questions that come up from that is one, it doesn't have to be so much like your buffer, but what would you recommend to someone who's kind of playing us maybe a similar game? Like, what do you feel is like a good amount for an emergency fund, you know, in your account? And does that buffer grow as you take more risk?
I think it should.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm still kind of new to Turo, and I'm still new to the Airbnb game, but I'm way more seasoned in real estate and in investment properties. And I always tell people you need 5 to 10 grand a property because, you know, if a furnace goes out and you have no money, then it becomes an emergency. Whereas if you have 5 grand per property, you know, then it's not so much an emergency. With Turo, I would recommend, and the Turo game's a little different because you can leverage your risk basically. So if you're starting out and you're like, man, I don't have a big savings account, you can take less money and give more money to Turo, and they take on more of the risk and they cover more of, you know, damage, they cover more wear and tear. For me, I'm at a point where I have 7 vehicles and I've done the math and I feel like I'd rather keep that money, but I have a $2,500 deductible, and last weekend I had 6 cars out. So 6 times $2,500 is, you know, so I would say you at least need that deductible per car. So, you know, if something comes up, you know, it's not, for me, it's really a challenge to not emotionally react when something happens, right? So when the air conditioner goes out on our Airbnb, or when I have 7 cars out, somebody's going to get in an accident at some point. We've had several. But it's hard because you know, especially with cars, I take such good care of them. But when you have 7 or 8 cars out, something's going to happen.
How are you going about, well, that was one of my questions. I don't remember my other question, but a new question I have is, how are you going about even managing having 7 cars and getting 7 cars to 7 different people that are flying in on the same weekend or the same day? Like, how are you even managing that Turo
That's
game?
a great question. So the two generic answers for that is strategy and planning.
Okay.
So, and I'll give you some examples. My planning and my execution has to be it has to be good. And actually Turo, and I was sharing this with you, Turo has really moved the needle for me with my scheduling and with me and my wife on communication. And I never thought of all the things that would fix my marriage, Turo would be it. But when I have 6 cars going out, like, we can't not communicate, or we'll just get our asses handed to us. And so lots of planning, lots of putting stuff in the schedule, lots of looking the day before to see what my schedule looks like to make sure I'm set up for success. And then the strategy piece is all of our cars we can remote lock or unlock, and we have a really good plan in place for, you know, if I have meetings tomorrow and a car goes out, which I have a car going out tomorrow, and I do have meetings. So this is a good example. I have a plan in place that I need to get it finished, getting it clean tonight, finish getting pictures done, and then I'm going to park it and I'm going to lock it. And so tomorrow when the guest reaches out to me, all I have to do is hit the app on my phone and hit unlock. And to me, that's a game changer, because if you're sitting waiting for people at the airport, that just turns into a nightmare.
What app do you use to like be able to
Um,
remote unlock and lock your cars?
So that all the new cars have that capability, and the best way I can describe it is anything that has an SOS system in it has that capability,
Okay.
because it runs through that system. And so most of them have like their own proprietary app though. So like Jeep, Dodge, and Ram all have Uconnect in them, which is like their
Mhm.
technology. My BMW has a My BMW app. The Infinity has iTouch or something, and so it's all
Mhm.
apps to them, and you have to pay for those services, but they're anywhere from like 10 to 15 bucks a month, and
Yeah.
that saves me. I mean, shoot, it probably saves me 10 hours a week
Right.
just sitting and waiting on people.
And
But there's
you're
also
just
tracking in those apps too.
okay, so you can keep an eye on where your cars are located when
Yep.
they're out. Okay. And you're parking in
Yep.
the economy lots?
We were parking in the economy lots. DIA and Turo just changed. So you can park in either economy lot now or either garage. And again, there's some strategy with that too, because there are a lot of cars that get stolen from the airport. So that's, a big fear that a lot of Turo people have, but we don't park them in the Turo spots. And I really try not to put lock boxes on cars because those turn them into targets.
Mm. Um, yeah, I wonder about that. Because that's what I have on my vehicle is not so much the lockbox, but that like hitch safe.
Yeah, and I have those, and I think those work good because if you put the plastic or the rubber cover on them, they're a little bit more inconspicuous, where if
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lockbox on the window, the lock boxes on the window are just a lot easier to break into. And I mean, actually, a lot of them, all you gotta do is break the glass, and then you can throw the lockbox in the car, and the car will start. So you
yeah.
got to watch some of that stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point.
The hitches though are pretty hard I think they're a lot harder to break into because they've got the hitch around it. So
yeah. I just wondered about that too. With mine, at least, and I only do one car just so that I can have the other car to use. I usually drop it off, and now this will be different now that I've got an assistant who'll do it for me. But I usually drop it off within the hour that they're going to be picking it up, right? So they're cruising in, and I know they're landing at 11 a.m. and I'm usually dropping in at 10:30 or 11 a.m. Shortly before they, so it's not really. I don't feel that obviously lowers the amount of time that it's just sitting there, looking ready to be stolen. But I haven't thought about that too much. But that is something definitely that I would probably think a lot more about if I had 7 children like you do with your 7 cars. It's like you just increase the
yeah,
probability of something happening.
absolutely. But I think you also have to treat it more like a business. And it's been really
Yeah,
hard for me because like cars are kind of like my children, right? Like I
yeah,
really take pride in having them. I work really hard to get them. And so I've had to learn to kind of emotionally disconnect a little bit, and that
yeah,
like it's not a matter if it's going to happen, just when.
yeah.
But there's we have trackers in all the cars, and I'm actually looking into getting the Samsung AirTags,
I don't know
and
what
just
those
kind
are.
of hiding. So there's Apple AirTags that are basically like trackers. The bad thing with the Apple ones is it pings everybody's phone and tells them they're being tracked. So that's
Uh,
probably not a good idea. But
yeah,
Samsung has ones, and how they work is they connect. Google and Android are dirty, right? And they're doing stuff and we don't even know. So they'll basically talk to any phone that's close, and then the phone will send a signal telling the system where the tag is.
hmm.
And those are just like little tiles, like those little tiles, and you can hide those anywhere in the car.
Oh, interesting.
So, because there's also trackers you can buy and plug in, but if they come unplugged, then they don't work. So
Yeah, I do know in my, that I bought the HVAC business 2 months ago. I do know in my technician's truck, the previous owner, which I'm paying for as well, installed like hardwired installed in the engine block, kind of like a GPS, so I can track the van at any given time. you know, which is kind of nice. So I think that's smart to have that. And I used to have that set up through the Porsche app that I no longer pay for, but it would tell me how fast they were going, where they were at, you know, so if they broke 100 miles an hour, I was like, hey, mine's slowing down or whatever, you know, like I stopped doing that because, you know, people that are renting a Porsche probably don't want to be babied on how to drive, you know? So I was like, okay. But
and I think you have to be mindful too, like my anxiety, like I said, could be high at times and I can get a little obsessive. And so, you know, if you get hyper obsessive, some of that stuff can really be like bad. But
try to control what you can't control.
I have all the, and so I'm not telling people to slow down because I have 3 cars. I have 3 cars that have 700 horsepower, right? So like, you know, if I rented a 700 horsepower car and somebody was telling me to slow down, I'd be pissed. But you know, sometimes it just puts my mind and my anxiety at ease if I can look and, you know, see where the car's at. Or, you know, I have on some of my parameters set up. So like on the Infinity, if it leaves the airport lot, I get a ping on my phone. And so if I get a ping on my phone before the renter comes in, I know there's something up.
That's true. That's a good point.
And I actually do the same thing with the Airbnb. I've got cameras on the outside. I've got Nest thermostat. I can lock and unlock the door. I can open the garages. It'll tell me if the garage is open. And so it just is enough to kind of keep my anxiety at bay because I can look at it and, you know.
I think that's good.
Kind of just feel better about it.
How do you feel? What I don't necessarily love about the Turo thing, and just educate me if I think if it's probably not the right approach. What I don't love about Turo and just cars in general is that there's a lot of moving pieces literally in the car. There's a lot of things that can break down. It's a depreciating, you know, asset, if you will, right? And the more miles that it gets, you know, the more the value of the car goes down versus, you know, Airbnb, obviously with real estate, hopefully that the house is going to be appreciating over the long haul. And worst case scenario, if shit hits the fan, you could always put in a long-term renter. I just have a hard time. Like, I don't know exactly what my fallback would be if I had 7 cars like you do. Would you just like liquidate them, fire sale them? I don't know exactly what you do if you have a bunch of cars and all of a sudden something happens, you know, like even in the pandemic, I could probably find someone to rent my house, but I don't know if there's, you know, what I would do if people stop renting cars and traveling.
I think, and you're kind of hitting on some of my tender spots as far as the fear goes, which is fine. Like, I think you have to really, I've had to really learn to control what I can control. And so on all the cars, we do mileage limits. So on the nice ones, I do 100 miles a day. On SUVs, I do 200 miles a day because I don't want somebody, you know, borrowing them and I've had somebody put up 800 miles on a car in one day before I put those limits in place. All my cars have warranties on them. So I'm like very leveraged on that, you know, and that costs, and that can cause you to be upside down on stuff. But the other thing is that I'm looking into right now is more education, right? Like, I would consider myself, you know, somewhat experienced in Turo. I think I do pretty successful, but like, we're signing up for classes. I mean, there's always more to learn. But the other thing I notice is, like, I really try to pulse the market. So May was our slowest month. And you really gotta watch the market and what the market's telling you. And then, like, with me, what I really need is I need the car payments paid. And so if I have to lower prices and be a little bit more strategic and not charge as much, or, you know, in May, I did some free deliveries. You know, I lowered prices quite a bit. I got aggressive on that stuff. And then May shaped out to be pretty good, you know, like we broke pretty much even. As far as like, you know, I don't, you know, anything could happen, but I think Turo's here to stay, just like I think Uber or Airbnb or anything else is. And the other thing that I'm thinking through is like, if anything, 2020 has taught us like that's probably a worst case scenario, the pandemic happening. And like we all kind of made it. We all made it work and we all did it. And so you know, but I am thinking about like there's a recession coming. Are people gonna, you know, not travel as much and do that stuff? But I just find it hard to believe, and this goes back to my first point with uncertainty, like uncertainty makes people, and fear makes people change their behaviors temporarily, not permanently. And so, you know, like we all, when gas prices went up, we're like, oh, I'm gonna drive less, you know, this is crap. I'm not, you know, I'm thinking about getting a Prius. And then a month later, we all just go back to what we were doing.
Yeah, that makes me laugh. I agree. I mean, when I filled up for 140 the other day, I'm like, oh my God, you know, it was 85, you know, a year ago. Can I afford it? Yes. Do I really want to afford it? Not really, you know, but I don't change my behavior a ton, you know. I think for lower income people, they may have to change that. And that's something that obviously you have to take into consideration. But if you are taking the risk on Turo and that sort of thing, you got to believe that you're resourceful enough to come up with, like you said, cash flow to be able to work with a couple different cars. What I was going to ask you, oh, and in terms of another detail, like, do you keep all the cars then out of the airport full time, and like, how do you go about washing them and making sure that they're topped off and vacuumed and clean and sanitized and all that stuff? You know, is that something your wife is doing full time, or is that someone else that, like, do they do it? Customer? Do you have others? Have you hired someone to do that full time, part time?
Kind of a little bit of everything that you mentioned. So I've hired people to do it. And I haven't had a ton of good luck with consistency on that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've had a ton of people tell me you can't find somebody, you don't pay enough. But I mean, there's always somebody that'll do that stuff.
Right.
But most of what we're doing is we have really good systems and really good strategy. And so to give you an example of that, I buy car wash memberships for all the cars, and
Same.
I have a lot of good relationships, right? So I have a relationship with the car wash, and they know I have 7 cars, and they know every time I get a car, I'm going to buy a membership. So they give me a pretty substantial deal, and I always just buy the year. So it's anywhere from 250 to 350, not even 350. I'd say 250 to 300 for a whole year. And that's unlimited car washes and vacuums. And so I'm a car guy at heart. So like I'm washing cars. I mean, my nice cars, you know, if I'm driving them, I'll wash them 3 or 4 times a week. So a lot of it's just keeping up on them. But we'll just spin them through the car wash, vacuum them out, and then wipe them down. And then, you know, one of the challenges that we've had with dropping cars off is the hardest thing is you have to have 2 people to do it. You got to have somebody take the car, and you have to have somebody come get you. You know, I've Ubered back, but it gets pretty expensive. So then again, I'm being resourceful, and you know, I have a young guy that came and mowed my lawn the other day, and I'm like, hey man, like, would you take 25 bucks to like give me a ride from the airport? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, that's better than 30 to 50 on
Yeah.
Uber.
Right.
And so I'm doing that. And then there was one more thing I was thinking of. We try to be strategic with parking them at the airport, so it doesn't, like, I'm big on not letting it interfere with my schedule. So, you know, I drop the cars off when it's more beneficial for me rather than when
Yeah.
it's And so like, I like what you said about dropping them off sooner to the pickup time, because you'll save on parking that way. But I also think the other side of that is, if it's affecting your productivity for your next day's schedule, I think it's worth it to drop it off the day before and just pay for the parking, or have the guest pay for parking.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so
yeah.
we
That's
do
been
that.
that's a little bit of a. It's just so much easier, obviously, just with one car, because I don't leave it out
Oh yeah.
there. I just use it like you really have it. You have a full on business. I just do it just to pay for, you know, maintenance and insurance and any other types of, and
Yeah.
gas, so I lease mine out maybe twice a month, but typically just once a month. And then I block it off so I can drive a nice car essentially for free. But it does get a little bit expensive, like you said, with Uber. So a lot of times I'll take the train down to Union Station or vice versa. So that Uber to the train is, so I'm just looking at like, okay, I can, get out to the airport for $20 using a short Uber and the train versus, and so each city obviously is going to be different for whoever's,
Well, and for
looking at doing
me,
Turo.
whenever, and I'm sure you think the same way, like if I'm doing something and it's costing me time, what can I do that's productive during that time, right?
Right,
So
right.
like for me, if I didn't have 3 kids and a wife and
Yeah.
7 cars, like taking the train would be fine, but like I would probably be like doing my reading during that time, or some meditation, or
I work on my computer.
Like, yeah, working on, work on my computer. And that's the nice thing, is as long as I have my computer, my phone and service, I can work whenever.
Yeah, that's a nice thing. So it does kind of require, obviously, flexibility of schedule. I think it'd be difficult for someone to be one of the guys that are watching this who has a full-time job, 9 to 5, to make this work.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it'd be pretty tough to be able to do it without a flexible schedule.
I don't think so. I mean,
You don't think so?
No. My schedule's pretty busy, and so like I would just drop the car off the night before.
You said the night before. Yeah, right. Right.
I think, yes, do you have to pay for more parking that way? Yeah, but like you just build it into the business. And so like you're either charging the guests for delivery fees, or I'm just texting them and telling them they got to pay for it. And
Yeah.
as long as like you're building that into the communication, but I don't think so. I just think it does, however, take some adequate planning and looking at your schedule. And I was terrible at doing that before. And now I'm like, and I never thought I would do this, but like the day before, I'm looking at my schedule for the next day, and I'm like, how do I set myself up for success? Is the car washed? Is it vacuumed? Have I cleaned all the crap out of it, right? Have I gotten the car seats out? And I'm working on some stuff with energy in the morning, health wise, but it's tough for me to get going in the morning. So I don't leave a bunch of stuff for the morning, because that will be setting myself up for failure. And I'm always usually running, trying to get going anyway. So
I don't know how you do 7 cars. I mean, I think being able to have, I would think it'd be a hard thing for you to do if you were by yourself completely with a full-time job. And what if you got to drop off 2 or 3 cars on a Friday morning, like tomorrow morning, because a lot of people are arriving? I think that'd be really, really pretty challenging, So it really does. I mean, like you said, you're certainly dependent upon your wife and vice versa if you guys kind of make this thing work together. Sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing though that I would say is I'm getting better about paying attention to my surroundings. And so like going on next door and seeing if there's a neighborhood kid that wants to mow my lawn. I'm very aware of like some of my friends that are having troubles financially. And so, I'll ask them, hey, would you help me? And I will happily give $20 to $25 a car. And I actually had a couple friends that were dropping off cars for me for $25 a car. And I would get to the point where I would pay up to as much as $50 if I could be hands off. And so you got to think about, if I got 3 cars going out on a Friday, that's $150, and that only takes you about 3 hours total.
Right.
You know, and so I would just say you have to be, and I agree with you. I think, you know, you have to look at it, and say, you know, like, what's the problem at hand? But I've also learned that there's always a solution, right? Like, you know, my lawn has been the bane of my existence for the last 2 weeks. And I'm like, I'm just not thinking the right way, right? My mother-in-law's giving me hell, and she's telling me, when you worked at Target, it didn't look this bad. I'm like, ugh. I'm like, you know, and then this guy comes over and mows it, and it's like $25, and I'm like, well worth it.
Total.
But I mean, everybody's in different spots, and like, some people, that $25, they need that to eat. But I'm just like, I try to be resourceful and think through things. And so I have another friend that he's a little bit more high maintenance, and he needs a lot of my attention. And so, like, there's been times where I'm like, come help me drop a car off so we can chat for an hour. You know, so I'm always paying attention to things around me, and you know, how to problem solve. And that's a new skill for me. That kind of stuff used to put me, I would get into analysis paralysis, and I would just look at a problem and think that it was unsolvable. So
yeah, I was going to say, it takes a certain type of mentality, approach to be able to, I mean, you're juggling 7 cars just as a single guy like me would be enough to be like, oh shit, you know. And yes, you have your support of your kids. You also have an Airbnb. You also have your full-time job and all the other things that come along with home ownership. Like, you've got a lot, man. So I just think you're doing a lot to obviously do things right in terms of being able to plan, like you said, have a strategy. Otherwise, you know, your hair could be on fire every day just trying to figure out how to make it through without losing your sanity, you know. So
I live and die by my schedule. You know, and I was that guy that, you know, when I was taking classes, I was like, I'll never do that. I'll never have a schedule. And I live and die by it now. You know, I wouldn't remember. And I joke with my wife, if it's not my schedule, it won't happen. Like,
I'm similar for sure. Do you keep a lot of the Turo stuff? Do you manage it a lot of them, like, just on a Google spreadsheet, or you just do it all through the apps? How do you guys keep track of everything, and drop-offs and everything? Is it on your calendar?
Yeah.
You just, okay. And do you share calendars with her so you guys can see everything that's going on?
Yeah. That's a good question. We have everything lives in one calendar now. And so, because as we get busier and busier and the kids have more stuff, I have to make sure my stuff doesn't conflict with hers. And, you know, she might have something, she might have a doctor's appointment, and I need to get the kids. So it all lives in one. But she's actually getting ready to quit her 9-to-5 job and to take on a more active role with our businesses. And so I'm envisioning she's probably going to have her own schedule. And then what I'll do is I'll link her schedule with mine. And then I'll just probably, at some point, it'll probably get to be too much, and I'll unclick it in mine, so it doesn't show. But then I can go in there and click it if I need to look and see. And so, like I said, with Turo, we've had to communicate on stuff. But yeah, we put it in there. And so what I've done is, the rule is you can have, or the old rule used to be, you could have the car there 4 hours before or 4 hours after. That was the agreement that Turo had with DIA. Now we pay for parking, so they don't care. You could leave it there for days if you want. But I'm always putting a 4-hour window. So if the car's got to be there at 12:30, I'm going to say, hey, 8:30 to 12:30 is my drop off. And if it's got to be picked up at 12:30, then 12:30 to 4:30 is my window. So that gives me a window to look and see. And so I can fit it into my schedule. And then if my morning's busy, then I'm just doing it the night before.
That's cool. Do you find that that you have a car, a couple of different cars, or a style of car like SUV versus sedan that is rented more often?
Oh, good question. I thought you were going somewhere different with that. It varies. It really varies, and it varies on your strategy. And so my strategies, I have two strategies right now. And that could change, but I have 6-7 passenger SUVs that are all-wheel drive. And then I have what I call my exotics, right? Like more of the high horsepower cars. And it's going to vary, and we're going to have to watch the market like you were talking about, because so I have a BMW M5. It's an all-wheel drive car. It's 4 doors. It seats 5 people, but like it has seasonality. People don't rent that car in the winter. You know, and then the SUVs actually do pretty good in the winter because a lot of people go skiing.
Totally.
And so, but my exotics, if you will, don't go out as much. They go out less often, but when they go out, I get more per day for those cars. So I just have to know. And then I kind of also have a strategy with, I know I'm trying to think how to explain this. I know that the exotics are going to go out less often. So I am kind of banking on the SUVs being gone more frequently, and that offsetting the exotic car payments, because the exotic car payments are brutal. And so I just know, and like I'm thinking through this winter, and I'm strategizing on how to get my next Airbnb, how to get our next house. And so I want to make sure the cars don't get in the way of that. But I'm thinking I might need to get another SUV to balance out, because now I have 3 big car payments to balance out, to make sure if the nicer cars aren't gone, I can still make those payments. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. But kind of along those lines, because I remember reading some, and maybe actually it might have been on Turo, or I got it through their email, whatever. But I think it was something to the effect of like, some dude had 15 cars in LA and had a full-time business with this, but he had done the research so that he knew that the number one most rented car through Hertz or Alamo or whatever was a convertible Camaro. And so he bought 15 of those, you know, and they're just, you know, but that's Los Angeles. And so you kind of have to know your market and look at like, yeah, you're right. 4-wheel drive, all-wheel drive is so important, obviously in Colorado, but it wouldn't necessarily be that important if you're in more of a southern state, right?
No, not at all. And so Turo there's a ton of
Tools.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. So Turo they'll tell you what cars have the best ROI. I use something called Car Sync that it will give you the number one brand, it'll give you the number one model, it'll give you the number one rented, it'll give you, but I don't know, and I'll probably get into this where I start dabbling in the cars that are more popular. But I also wonder, so like, I'll give you an example. Jeep Wrangler is probably the number one on Turo. It's the number one ROI. It's over 200%. But I wonder, since it's the number one, how many of them are there? There might be a lot of them on there. And then like you're getting one that's the number one rented, but does that create a bunch of competition for you? Because it's the number one on there, and then you're like constantly fighting that competition. And so like I haven't found the sweet spot with that, and I'll probably get into that a little bit more. And the other thing is like economy cars, they probably are gone more frequently and they're cheaper, but you're only getting $20-$30 a day for them. And so it's just interesting, and there's like a lot of different ways you can go with it. You know, I know my nicer cars, I don't think there's So, I mean, I have a Trackhawk, an M5 and a TRX, and I don't think there's any in the state.
Yeah.
And so my pull on those is people are looking for something sweet to drive. And like, I have no competition on those, but I still have to be strategic with price, because if I put them on too high, I might get lucky every once in a while. But my goal's consistency and longevity. And so if you go on Turo and you see some of those nicer cars, some of them are on there for 500 or 800 or 600 a day, but they have no rentals. So when I'm looking on Turo, I'm looking at how many rentals do they have. So we were actually looking at Lamborghinis the other day, and man, there was a couple ballers on Turo, like, right? They had, I mean, one of these guys had 1,000 trips.
Wow.
And so I'm just looking at, I want to build it like a business, not like a hobby, because, if I build it like a hobby, then I'm gonna have all these car payments, and then I'm gonna be looking at exit strategy and trying to figure out how to get the hell out. So
Totally. But that brings up a good question too, which is, do you set your own pricing, or do you just use Turo smart pricing?
both.
You set ranges, use both.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So the SUVs, have you used automated pricing? You can set a floor and a ceiling.
Yep.
And then
Which
there's
is what I
kind of
do.
an algorithm that follows. So with the SUVs, I've done that. Right now, what I'm looking at doing is, I hate it when cars are out in front of my house. And not because the visual thing, is because I'm thinking, am I making money or am I not making money? And so
Right.
one thing I haven't messed with a ton is lowering the ceiling. And so I'm going to start bringing the max down and seeing what that does. Because I've noticed if I lower the floor, if the ceiling's too high, the algorithm kind of stays in the middle. So I'm going to start lowering that high point and seeing if I can get cars gone more frequently and kind of really be more profitable.
Yeah.
The nice cars are harder because the system doesn't pick up doesn't pick up on that. And so, like, my Jeep Trackhawk is not in the system, and so it just thinks it's a Grand Cherokee, and so it wants me to rent it for $60 a day, and I'm not going to do that. And so I've kind of found a sweet spot of like $200 a day for those cars. And that sweet spot is like, I'm making enough to where when they're gone, it's worth it. But, I'm not, it's just kind of in the middle, because you don't want just anybody renting them and tearing the hell out of them. And so, like, the other thing I do is 2-day minimums. I don't rent any of my cars for 1 day. I don't know if you do that too. And so, on the nicer cars, if you're in $200 a day, 2 days, that's $400. Delivery is 120 on the nicer cars. So that's $500. And then you have a 500 to 750 deposit. You're in that car over $1,000. So you're really not gonna, and that's another thing people have told me, they're just gonna tear your cars up. And like, I've been pretty surprised. I had like a 26-year-old kid rent the Jeep last week, and yeah, I mean, I could tell he got on it a couple of times with the tires. But like I said, if I don't want people doing that, then I probably need to get a different car or not be in the Turo game. And so, but I mean, most of the time it's like, I want to test drive something. I want something nice. I'm getting married. I'm turning 40 and I want to be in something flashy. It's really not, it's really cool. I had another lady that said she had a M5 CS, which is like a $200,000 car. And she's like, I just want to be in an M5. And I'm like, and she was like, well, I want you to trust me. And I'm like, you have a CS, like, they're extremely hard to find. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's interesting. The nuances of all the little things in terms of delivery fees, and like you said, the floor and the ceiling of pricing, and it can certainly be a little hobby, which it is for me. But to do it right for you, it's like I think your approach is really spot on in terms of really looking at it in terms of the business. And yes, the icing is maybe you get to drive some of your nice cars from time to time, and have other people pay for it, which is nice,
Other other thing that comes to mind though for me though is like I said, I would consider myself pretty well versed in Turo, but like I have a rep that I reach out to that works at Turo, and so I'll call him and pick his brain on stuff, and then we have that class we're starting. And so I'm under no illusion that at any time like I can't learn something. And so I found something out from the Turo rep a couple of weeks ago. I said, hey man, it's slow. Can you look things over? Let me know what your thoughts are. And he said he gave me a nugget of information, and the nugget was, if your delivery fee is above your daily average on your car, the algorithm and the search will kick you down. And so I was like, sweet. And so I lowered some of my delivery fees because I could tell, something was kicking me down in the search. So like when you search on Google, right, it lists stuff. It does the same thing in Turo. It lists cars, and you don't want to be at the bottom of that search. And
Of course.
just I don't spend a ton of time on it. I just spend my time that I spend on it. I know what to ask and who to ask and kind of do that.
I love it. Well, in kind of wrapping things up, where do you see yourself going with this? Do you feel like you're going to push towards with Turo? I mean, do you see it like, are you going to keep growing your fleet? Do you feel like you're going to keep growing your fleet in terms of nicer cars? We're going to stick around 7 or 8. Like, does it not even matter how many cars? Is it like how much money do you want to make profit wise? Is that kind of more the goal? What's kind of the strategy going forward for you with the business?
Well, there's a couple different things. I mean, the main strategy is just arbitrage, right? Like I'm buying something and my payment's one thing, and then I'm getting at least that or more a month. But we're definitely going to grow. Like I said, my wife's going to quit her 9-to-5 job, and we're definitely going to grow. I'm trying to be strategic to make sure that buying cars doesn't get in the way of me buying real estate.
Right.
And so one of the strategies that we're diving into here sooner than later is, I've had a bunch of people say, I love the idea. And you mentioned this, I don't have the resources or the time. And so what we're building out is the strategy around, they call it co-hosting. And so basically we'll be taking on other people's cars and we'll be running that for them. And then we'll be, splitting that profit a certain way. And so, I might have to get another car to offset some payments here coming up. But I think what I'm really going to start going after is growing the fleet, but growing the fleet without me having to leverage. And so that's something we're really going to look at and dive into here sooner than later. And I actually already have a couple of people that are interested in it because our system's built out good. Like I can get a car tonight and I could have it on in 10 minutes. And I also have the bandwidth to know, like you mentioned, going from 1 to 7 it would probably be pretty hard, but I could take on 2 or 3 more and just, the second part of that question is, I'm going to have to at some point get some leverage. And at some point I'd like to pick your brain some more on, I think at some point I'm going to need an assistant, but I think that role is going to be kind of a dual role, in like an assistant to help me with real estate and Turo, like kind of blended. And so I'm trying to figure out like what productive things they could do in the real estate space. And so some of it might be data entry, some of it might be, just the things I'm not good at or I don't want to do. So those are kind of the things that I'm looking at for the future.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I think that's we're definitely along the same lines with that, and that's kind of why I hired who I hired 2 weeks ago, which was like, or in the way that I did it was like I could, invest in another Airbnb, right? and then hope that that's ramped up those payments so that I could, or that type of income, so I could hire someone to support me, But to me, I was like, but that's kind of a gamble, because I kind of like, I'm already at the end of my bandwidth in terms of how much stuff that I'm doing, because I was doing everything from high value, actions to going over and grabbing sheets from my Airbnb and bringing them home to wash them, and fold them to take them back over there, for my Denver property at least. So I thought, like, rather than buying a piece of real estate, why not buy a business that already has the cash flow, And so I ended up using that HVAC business to be able to hire my assistant. She does 20 hours a week on the HVAC business, and the other 20 is solely dedicated to Turo, Airbnb, personal assistant stuff, running around town, just doing anything and everything, So it's very similar to what you're talking about, having that hybrid kind of role, which I think at some point, if you have enough things going on, which you certainly do, and you want to have quality time with your wife and your kids, like, you have to have support, and you don't want to just have a business relationship with your spouse, you gotta make sure that you create the time. So this could be a whole nother conversation to talk about.
Yeah, the other thing that you made me think about, though, is like, I find myself doing the same thing you did, right? Like, well, can I afford that? Can I do that? And I have to catch when I'm having those thoughts, because I'm like, if I really evaluate them truthfully, it's like, I can't not afford to do it. So I'm like, find myself like, ooh, do I really want to pay somebody to mow the yard at the Airbnb? And I'm like, how else is it going to get done? Like,
time or
and
money,
then I
right?
find somebody to do it for $60 every 2 weeks, and I'm like, that's well worth it. And so I'm just finding myself a lot of times being like, you can't afford not to do that stuff. And I think that stuff is like the education and the leverage usually for me.
Yeah. Otherwise you're not growing, and you're just going to be spinning your wheels doing what you're doing without ever really growing what you're doing, So I feel that, and I think the education is obviously the biggest part, which is hopefully, I think anyone who would watch this who's kind of thinking about, like, should we get into Turo, or maybe they're dabbling, even like me, like, if they really want to push, like, you're a huge resource, and I think they probably learned a shit ton out of this. So thanks for turning this mastermind into a good conversation,
Totally. And I the thing I'd leave you with is, like, I'm an open book, and like, I'd be more than happy to share. And I've joked with people, like, I'll literally let you sit down with me and cut and paste my systems. Like, I don't care, because a lot of people are like, well, that's competition. I'm like, no, like, it's really not, but then I'm also open to having conversations around, just anything really. Because 6-7 months ago, if we would have talked, if you'd have told me this would be where I'd be, I would say there's no way.
Yeah. It's pretty sweet. You've taken a lot of steps forward. That's for sure. Taking a lot of risks, takes balls, obviously, to do what you're doing, but I think it's pretty cool and it's pretty inspiring. So I appreciate you being such an open book. And that's kind of what I think the mastermind and the brotherhood needs to be, is like, we need to be open source support for helping guys figure out, like, greater levels of fulfillment and success and happiness and everything else. But, like, let's all come together and be open books versus be competition. So I appreciate that, man. Thank you very much for this good conversation, for sure. Thank you for showing up and giving.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Really appreciate it. Are you off to drop off the car tonight?
Yes and no. I have somebody coming and get it, the BMW, but they're getting it from the house. So I just got to go run it through the car wash and vacuum it. I mean, cool. That's, the other thing that I love is, I'm such a car guy. Like, the car stuff doesn't feel like work to me. Like,
it's fun.
I could be like, oh, I got to go wash a car, but I'm like, oh, I get to go wash a car. Like, and so just setting myself up for tomorrow, washing it, vacuuming it, making sure the kids didn't leave shoes and socks in there.
For sure.
Make sure in the morning I could just pull it out of the garage and leave it in the driveway.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for spending the night when you still have other stuff to do tonight. Appreciate you
Yeah,
very much.
absolutely.
Yeah, we'll catch up more soon.
Sounds good.
All right, buddy. Talk soon. Thanks, guys, for
Talk to you
tuning in
soon.
and watching the recording. Yep. Thank you, Zach. And reach out to Zach if you got questions since he's in the Brotherhood and everything else.
Yeah, I look forward to touching base with others. So
Yeah, exactly. Awesome, brother. Have a good night.
good night.
See you, man.